Hello everyone, it's Old Guardian here. I'm often asked about a tier list for Warcraft Rumble minis, so which minis are the best, and it's kind of a difficult question to answer because for PvE purposes you're building a comp for various bosses against various mechanics, you're using a wide variety of minis there, so it always depends. However, I have tried to give this a lot of thought because people really would want to have a tier list, and this is my best attempt now. So I have distributed the minis to 5 tiers, the troop minis in particular. Tier S minis are ubiquitous. You can use these in almost any army. Almost any army you put them in, it's going to be a better army. Then tier A minis are widely used, very powerful minis for PvE purposes. Tier B minis are a little bit more limited, but they can be key minis in the right encounters, so you really kind of want them. Tier C minis are even more limited, they can still shine, but tier C, tier D minis hardly any good uses. I would be able to complete all the content in the game right now without any tier C or tier D minis, so I guess that shows a little bit of something at least. So let's take a look at the tier list. And here is the tier list that I made. So tier S minis, you can basically build an army out of these, and it has only 5 of them, so you need one more, but that army is going to roll through much of the content. And that's Harpies particularly with the poison talent. So Harpies with the poison talent are just the highest DPS unit in the game. And it's just incredible. Then there's the Witch Doctor, and with Spirit Ward talent, so the talent to make shields. An incredible mini, super flexible, and also protects all of your other vulnerable minis like those Harpies. Then there's Quillbore, and I would currently equip the Quillbore with the poison talent. Bristleback is another alternative, but I think poison is better in the end. So Quillbore can turn targets around, Quillbore can tank, your Harpies can come in and deal damage, just super flexible. Whelpegs, another wonderful unbound mini, has been nerfed multiple times, but it's still great, and I would still use the Flame Burst talent on that one. And Pyromancer with Pyroblast talent in particular, so that Pyromancer just comes in, shoots at a target, and boom, the target is gone. And those can form a core of a very, very powerful army. Then there's tier A minis that are very strong, but I wouldn't use them in every army that I could. So, for example, there's Chimera, and I do love Chimera, especially with the double poison talent. Chimera is such a wonderful mini. It can kill bosses, it can kill so many bosses, just from the Devilsaur Queen to Ghoul Mag. Just a tremendous mini. It stacks so much poison, it deals so much damage, it's incredible. But of course it costs 5, and you don't always have spot for that kind of mini in your army. Then there's Execute, usually with the Bloodlust talent, sometimes with the cost reduction talent as well. So Execute can deal damage to bosses. Many people like to spam Execute on bosses, especially if you are out-leveling the content a little bit, it becomes even stronger. But it can also kill some smaller minis, help you get some towers. With the Bloodlust talent, it can make your Harpies even better killing machines, so very flexible mini. Then there's Plague Farmer with the range talent. Plague Farmer with the range can shoot further away than towers, it can outrange multiple bosses. It's just a tremendously good mini, and like a stronger version of Meatwagon. Meatwagon is in tier B, Meatwagon has the longest range in the game, but typically Plague Farmer range is enough. Plague Farmer is cheaper, and Plague Farmer is usually just superior to Meatwagon. Then there's Safe Pilot. Safe Pilot has also seen some nerfs, but it still remains a very flexible mini. I used to like Coming in Hot as the best talent, but after it was nerfed even harder than the Stealth talent, and the Stealth talent is nowadays the best one for that one. Coming in Hot can still be useful sometimes when you really need it to deploy quickly. Then there's Defiance Bandits for 1 gold, that means really useful cycle mini. They can stun, they can protect your base, they can open up opportunities for banshees, they can open up opportunities for pretty much everything. And if you had a picklock talent in a map with chests, then they can also just give you so much income. They're wonderful. Then a couple of big tanks. There's Fire Elemental and there's Abomination. Fire Elemental is naturally resistant, and you can give it armor with Shaman with the Earthshield talent. So if you think about PvP, you probably think about Shaman having the talent to heal your base, but if you think about PvE, then almost always you have Shaman to give armored to one of your minis, which typically is either a Fire Elemental or an Abomination. Fire Elemental, just a very flexible tank. Fire Elemental Abomination, the thing that really makes them good is that they have AoE damage. Fire Elemental with Immolation, Aura, then Abomination with the Poison talent, so that they will be able to deal AoE damage while they're tanking, and they can last a lot of damage. Then there's that Shaman with the Earth Shield, then Banshee, typically with Will of the Necropolis, so that you will gain full health mini when Banshee steals something. Banshee can help you solve many of the harder heroics, very useful in defense. Often if you're trying to push up, if you're a little bit underleveled, having Banshee is almost mandatory because you just can't fight against those minis. Even though Banshee turns the mini into its own level, so you might not have a useful mini afterwards, but you just might not be able to kill a Molten Giant, for example, and then Focused Banshee just takes care of it for you. Then a couple of cheaper cycle minis, the Ghoul and the Griffin Rider. They see more play in PvP typically than in PvE, but they're still useful as cycle minis. If you're not using any of the big tanks, then typically you need some kind of tank. If it's not your leader, then Ghoul just might do, because Ghoul can also eat, and you use the talent that gives it armored when it eats, then it becomes more durable, and then it just keeps replenishing its health, and just keeps going on. Griffin Rider with Fury can deal a lot of damage. Also very useful to cycle. Sometimes you build up an army that has some of these bigger minis, like you have Abomination and Shaman, or you're using a Banshee, or you have a Chimera in it, and then you just need some of these cheaper minis that will balance the overall cost, and those are some of the most effective ones. Then we have B tier. B tier is again a little bit less flexible, but I have used all of these minis to such good effect nonetheless. Starting with the Angry Chickens. Angry Chickens are one of my favorite minis in the game. Tremendous against all sorts of single target minis like Prowlers, against Stonehoof Torrents. Just wonderful, wonderful mini, although of course weak to AoE. With the Fury talent they are just tremendously good. Then we have the Bat Rider. Bat Rider is wonderful because the flame pool stays on the ground, so the enemy plays minis into it, or stealth minis come into it, and just so many uses. Typically with the bigger flame pool, but sometimes also with the slow effect it can be good. But the bigger flame pool is generally the stronger one. Then we have the strongest utility spells. You can play this game PvE fine without using any spells, like almost ever. Auto Execute can be really handy. And then Polymorph and Cheat Death. So these can protect your minis. Typically you would use Polymorph with the Golden Fleece so that you get some of your gold back. You would use Cheat Death with Vampirism. So for example, if you have Chimera has gotten some poison stacks in, you put Cheat Death on it with Vampirism, then all of the lifesteal from the poison stacks just instantly heals your Chimera to full. Just such a wonderful combination. Dark Iron Miner, well, usefulness heavily depends on the map, but when it's a map where you need to mine some gold that you don't otherwise have access to, well, Dark Iron Miner it is. Then Darkspear Troll, another wonderful mini. Many people like to use it with regeneration. I sometimes use it with regeneration, but most of the time actually when Troll is really, really needed, I'm using it with poison. Because then adding that troll poison in is just going to stack poison so high that it's going to win you the map. Earth Elemental, a nice unbound tank. Quillbore is better, but sometimes you need the armored tank that's Earth Elemental instead of the resistant tank that's Quillbore, and then having the Earth Elemental a bit more health, a bit sturdier, just is better than Quillbore in some cases. Then also Footmen. I do love Footmen a lot. Armored tanks, they don't have that much health individually, but sometimes distributing that health over multiple targets is just good. If there's single target damage, if it's physical damage, those Footmen are the strongest tank in the game. Gargoyle and Goblin Sappers, two minis that can really take down some towers. Gargoyle typically going in slowly, Sappers going in fast. Gargoyle, you would usually use the talent to make it a little bit faster because it's so slow, but we'll see. Dryad is coming to the game soon, so maybe Gargoyle with the talent to take less aerial damage is going to be stronger. If you make it faster with Dryad, we'll see how that goes. And Sappers usually with Rocket Boots so that they can reach the target faster. Meat Wagon with range is the longest range mini in the game, and that just has its advantages. Molten Giant is another big tank, and it is the highest health mini in the game. So Molten Giant has some definite upsides. It's also already armored, which is another upside, but as a downside, because usually you want big tank with a shaman, and shaman can make them armored, so Molten Giant's armored is not that good, and then it doesn't deal any AoE damage, it's totally single target, and that's where it will lose a little bit against Abomination and Fire Elemental, but still because it has the highest health, and it's armored, and sometimes you don't pair it with shaman, sometimes you pair it with Fairy Dragon instead, and Fairy Dragon with the talent to give it resistant, and it can be a really good duo. Skeleton Body, an underappreciated mini, I would say. Really good damage dealer, unbound damage dealer. Unlike Wellbacks, it doesn't need to be popped, so you first play a tank so that the attention is drawn elsewhere, and then you drop the Skeleton Body. Wonderful even without a talent. Sometimes Ritual of Rhyme can be really strong with this, so that it doesn't move around. You can use it to guard. If you're not using that, you're probably using Corpse Run. Then a pair of brawlers, we have Stone of Thorin and we have Prowler. Pretty high DPS, especially with the Prowler, a little bit lower health, but they can charge in, really good against Ogre Mages, really good against Huntresses, and you are going to see plenty of both in PvE. So just wonderful minis. And then there's that Fairy Dragon, just for that talent to give resistance to a tank. And those are like the first 3 tiers, and if I had all the minis leveled up and well equipped from S, A and B tiers, I would be able to complete all the content that's currently in the game. There's stuff of course in the C and D tiers as well. C tier minis, I have used all of these. D tier minis, I have actually even used Warsong Raider sometimes, even though it's never been like the top choice, I suppose. I've used Grunt sometimes, even though I guess they also haven't been the top choice. I even used Chain Lightning occasionally. But like every time I use something from there is something that could be even stronger than that if it's just properly leveled and equipped. So nothing that great over there. On C tier, the mini that I would miss the most if I didn't have any of the minis on C and D tiers would be Living Bomb, although that's just because of like 1 dungeon and 1 heroic, maybe 2 heroics. So Living Bomb is good in a couple of maps, but it's just totally worthless pretty much everywhere else. And even in those maps, you can do them with a different strategy. You don't have to have Living Bomb to do them, so I guess that would be fine. So this is what my tier list for PvE purposes would look like. So you could of course ask, how does this differ from PvP? I don't play that much PvP, but I did notice that Conquistador had made a tier list for PvP and posted it on Reddit. This is what Conquistador's PvP tier list looks like. So I'm not going to question any of the choices here. I mean, I'm going to assume that, okay, this is a fine tier list for PvP. And there are a few things that are quite different between PvP and PvE. For example, here, Harvest Golem is listed as an S tier tank. I find that tank to be pretty much completely useless in PvE purposes. It's just a very different ball game because you're not playing in a fair playground, and Harvest Golem just does not stall quite the way that you would want to do in PvE, because in PvE you have to be a little bit more aggressive. You have to be the winner. You can't play a very slow game typically in PvE. Also Execute, while it's still a good mini in PvE, you can play PvE without any spells completely fine. It's not nearly as strong as it is in PvP, where you're facing a little bit more level playground. Then also something like Harpies, which is like a phenomenal PvE damage dealer mini, is only tier B in PvP. But of course Harpies are really fragile, and a human player can anticipate and focus your Harpies, so your Harpies might not be able to get as much done. Also, there's a bunch of stuff in the very lowest tier in this PvP tier list that I use quite a lot actually in PvE. Batrider, Chickens, Footmen, Meatwagon. So a bunch of minis that are very useful in PvE are not seeing nearly as much play in PvP. So there are definitely some differences, and also some differences when it comes to talents. For example, that Shaman talent, because Shaman talent in PvP is often the one that heals the base, whereas in PvP it's almost always the one that gives armor. So some differences if you think about that, but I'm mainly focused on PvE side myself. So I hope this answers some questions on which minis you should be focusing on and which minis can really help you advance in the PvE side of Warcraft Rumble. Thank you for watching. Click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and a special thanks to all of my Patreon supporters, YouTube members and Twitch subscribers who make all of these videos possible.